Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 242 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm Danièle Cybulskie, also known as the 5-Minute Medievalist. I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of us who are interested in medieval history either got here by having a great teacher in school, or, more likely, by coming across a really entertaining piece of public history, whether it was a documentary, a novel, a really well-written nonfiction book, or maybe even a podcast. My next guest is a force of nature when it comes to medieval history, given that he's proven himself to be spectacularly talented at all of those things. I'm speaking, of course, about Dan Jones. Dan needs almost no introduction, but just in case, here's a refresher. You'll have seen him on Netflix hosting Secrets of Great British Castles, or on History Hit hosting a few documentaries, which we'll get into in this episode. Or you'll have come across one of his many best-selling nonfiction books, including Powers and Thrones, A New History of the Middle Ages, The Templars, The Rise and Fall of God's Holy Warriors, or The Plantagenets, The Kings Who Made England. More recently, you may have spent some afternoons reading his novels Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter. You may have heard him as a guest on this podcast or on his own fantastic podcast, This is History, A Dynasty to Die For. I've invited Dan back to give us an update on what he's been up to and tell us all about his latest work. We'll talk about his new documentary, his new novel, and his new adventures as a podcaster since we heard him here last. And finally, he and I have a really awesome surprise for you, so stay tuned for our usual wide-ranging and sometimes outright ridiculous conversation, as well as the big reveal right after this. Well, welcome back to the Medieval Podcast, Dan. So good to see you again.
Always very nice to see you.
And the last time I saw you, we weren't having our particular friend romance, but you were having a bromance with Mike Livingston last time I saw you. It was at the Chalk Valley History Festival. You were working on a documentary for History Hit. Tell us all about that.
Well, we've done a few documentaries for History Hit, Mike and I. And so we've done a couple summers ago, Mike came and helped when I was making a show about the real history behind my first novel, Essex Dogs. We made a couple of films about the march to and battle of Crecy in 1346. And then last summer, Mike and I made a film about the Battle of Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That is a live issue in the UK. 1403, which was a battle fought during Henry IV's reign, at which the future Henry V was very badly wounded. And it's a kind of critical battle that people don't know that much about. And so Mike and I were working on a film about that. And Mike's fantastic. And we've really hit it off in the last few years. He's been very helpful to me when I've been writing my 100 Years' War novels. And he's just a great guy. And I really enjoy working with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And he knows everything there is to know about Crecy, especially. Yeah, you're working on Shrewsbury. Sorry, that was my bad. 2 years ago, you're working on Crecy. I can't keep up with you two and your battles and your bromance.
So far, it's a 2-battle bromance, and I don't know I don't really have a frame of reference for this, but it's got places to go. Like there's still a future in it.
I think you definitely have a future together, especially because the vibe is really good. For people who haven't actually watched your documentaries on History Hit, they're great. They're great. And you get into the whole arrow in the face thing, which is great. So for people who don't know or haven't listened to this, Henry V, future Henry V gets an arrow in the face, and you two get to have that on your show. I mean, who could ask for anything more?
Look, it was a fun film to make. It's a very interesting battle for lots of different reasons. There's a very interesting kind of surgical history attached to the operation to remove the arrowhead from the face, from the skull, from inside the face and skull of the future Henry V. And it was a real pivotal moment in English history, if you believe in sort of sliding doors moments in history, because Henry V shouldn't really have survived. I mean, given the severity of the wound he suffered at the Battle of Shrewsbury and the complexity of the surgery required to remove it, it was very fortunate and indeed improbable that he survived that. And without Henry V, I think that the course of the 15th century would have looked rather different, because as his reign as king showed, there were enormous possibilities out there for the Kingdom of England, but they were only really open to somebody with the particular cocktail of leadership skills that Henry himself had. I don't think, had Henry been killed at Shrewsbury and you end up with his brother John as King John II, or Thomas as Thomas I, or Humphrey as Humphrey I, or one of those other sons of Henry IV, I don't think you get Agincourt. I don't think you get those enormous conquests in northern France. So it's a pivotal moment in English history, and I'm not just saying that to sort of big up the films. I do believe that.
You don't need to big up the films. I'm bigging up the films because they are great. Really worth watching. Okay, so you first meet Mike Livingston because you were working on Crecy for your trilogy of novels. And I haven't been talking to novelists on this podcast because I feel like, well, honestly, it's too much work for me to vet everybody's novels. But I know your novels are coming from a place of a lot of research, a lot of historical work. Tell us about Essex Dogs, because you're now in novel 2. Start us at the beginning. What is Essex Dogs about?
Well, quite a few years ago now, I sort of decided to and had the opportunity to write some historical novels as well as the history books that I do. And I decided to set them, for various reasons, in the early stages of the 100 Years' War, the Edward III stage of the 100 Years' War. And I've just started writing the final novel in what is called the Essex Dogs trilogy. The first book, Essex Dogs, charts the adventures of a small, this isn't a technical term, but a platoon of ordinary English, well, not all English, ordinary quote-unquote British soldiers during the Crecy campaign. So we meet them landing on the beaches of Normandy in a scene reminiscent of 6th of June 1944, sort of, a medieval D-Day, if you like. And it follows them on the march to the famous Battle of Crecy. And they kind of bump up against some of the more interesting and charismatic noble figures of that time: Edward III, the Black Prince, William de Boon, Earl of Northampton, Thomas Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, among others. And it's really a way of seeing medieval warfare not through the eyes of that latter characters, the knights and the nobles, who are so often lionized by chroniclers like Froissart, but through the eyes of ordinary soldiers who don't leave a sort of fully formed impression on the historical record. You can mine the historical record for names, for details of the soldierly experience, but not for fully realised biography of ordinary soldiers in the way that, say, Stephen Ambrose did for the Second World War. So I've approached that task through historical fiction. So Essex Dogs is about the Battle of Crecy. The second book, which came out last year, Wolves of Winter, followed on from the first, and it was about the siege of Calais of 1346 through 1347, an 11-month overwinter siege, at which the English ended up taking the city of Calais, and the sort of final moments of that, as recorded by the chroniclers, are famous, I suppose today, most famous for the Rodin sculpture of the burghers of Calais coming out of the city to offer up their lives and the keys of the city to Edward III. So that was the second book, and I've literally, just before I turned on Riverside to talk to you, finished writing page 1 of book 3 in this trilogy, the final book, which has a working title of Darker Seas, which I don't think we may or may not keep. And that's about, well, it starts in 1348 during the Black Death, and then it carries on through to 1350 and the Battle of Winchelsea, a huge naval battle off the coast of the town of that name in southern England, which the English fought the Castilians, and dramatic events ensued.
I don't envy you because, for reasons that we will get to much later, I have just been looking at naval battles and there is so little to work with. I mean, maybe that's great for historical fiction because you can just add stuff, but whew, that's a tough assignment that you've given yourself.
No, you've hit the nail on the head, really, as usual. There's a sweet spot for historical fiction, particularly. You don't want too much information because it constrains you somewhat, but you do need some to riff with and work with. And the challenge I've set myself in all of the Essex Dogs books is not to monkey around with the history, but just to play around in the gaps so that the beats of the history are kept consistent with the chronicles. And usually, well, every chapter in both the novels so far starts with a little excerpt from a chronicle or an administrative source or a letter from the king or whatever. And then the chapters sort of reconstruct, sometimes with serious intent and sometimes with mischievous intent, the events that those lines describe. As for naval battles, well, Winchelsea in 1350 is an interesting naval battle because we do know quite a lot about it. And it's an extraordinary time in English history because the Black Death sweeps through Europe, late 1347, 1348, 1349. 1350 is kind of post-pandemic world. And among the English court, that's the court of Edward III, it's also sort of post-great military victories world. So there's this kind of collision of these two spirits of kind of partying, everyone's still alive, and partying because they've bashed up the French. And there's an awful lot of drinking and bed hopping that seems to be going on at the court of Edward III at this time. And one of my favourite vignettes, which I'm really looking forward to recreating in this final novel in the trilogy, is the day of the Battle of Winchelsea. The English have been at harbour in the town of Winchelsea, a sort of naval port town, custom built by Edward I, and waiting for the Castilians to sail down from Flanders south. That's what they're going to do. So they're going to come close to the English coast because you have to, and the English aim is to go out there and intercept them. And it's a waiting game. And what do you do when you're waiting and it's the summer and, you're English? You drink heavily. So everyone is on these ships, kind of, as far as I can see, reading between the lines of the sources, getting really drunk. And there's this moment where Edward III, the king himself, says, it's obviously they're all a bit bored. What shall we do? Well, I think it's Sir John Chandos. Someone or other's just come back from Germany and learned all the new German kind of music that's really cool and hip. Think about it like German techno of the 14th century. And Edward III's like, come on, let's have a few bangers. And so they start playing like these banging medieval German techno on the ship, and everyone's got a party and drinking. If you've ever seen a video from like Ibiza of like those boat parties where a sort of famous DJ's playing on a boat, they sail around San Antonio or whatever. That's what it's like. And then someone goes, oh no, oh shucks, the Castilians are actually coming. And then the English go out, and the first order that's given, and this is a sort of a known order in medieval naval tactics, but I still think it owes something to the projected, in my mind at any rate, extreme drunkenness of the people on board the English ships. The order is, let's ram them. So the English. Now, the Castilians do have bigger ships, castles built on them, so they can shoot them. If you read this as sober, big S and small s history, then ramming ships is sort of a legit tactic before you try and board them. But it does seem to be like drunken bravado plays a bit of a part in this. The English start ramming the Castilian ships. Like, sail straight into them. What? Sail into them. Are you sure? Sail into them. Oh, God. Which so they do. And so the chronicle sources say the king's ship sort of almost sinks. The Black Prince's ship, he has to get off because that's sinking because they've been sailing them into other ships. Anyway, look, this is all good stuff. So sea battles can be fun, and the denouement to the Essex Dogs trilogy is going to be true to the style of the books hitherto, which is it's going to be serious history with kind of low down, dirty tone and intent.
I love it. I'm thinking like, you have this German techno background as you're ramming ship. It's like Mad Max on the sea, right? As Fury Road, Fury Sea Road.
Right. And so it sounds kind of funny the way I'm this way of telling the history is slightly flippant, I suppose. But I also think it isn't completely improbable, and that the amount of drunkenness that goes on in the 14th century, full stop, does not make this at all unlikely. And also just the character of the court of Edward III at this time. I mean, if you look at what the parties were like in the 1340s, I mean, from the 1330s and into the 1350s as well, but particularly in the late 1340s, the records do show all of these orders for these just gigantic costumes that everyone's wearing. They're dressing up as pheasants and as swans and as lions and as all these fantastical, elaborate costumes, and everyone's kind of parading about fighting dressed as giant birds. I mean, that, for me, that's kind of a party. And you don't have to do much to make that a kind of wild story, right?
Well, it's funny because we're laughing about it, but if you actually read your novels, I think that you could sum them up by saying war is hell. So, they're not about drunken parties very much. Right?
Well, no. So Essex Dogs, and particularly Wolves of Winter, it's a march into pretty dark territory. And in Wolves of Winter, it's this hellish siege. It's like medieval Stalingrad. After Wolves, I was like, I don't really go any darker than that, and we're getting into just like sort of, really depressing war porn was my feeling. So I do want to have, particularly because this new book's like a post-pandemic novel, I do want to have a sense of one of the questions that I have in my mind and that one of the characters will express at the outset is, when you've survived the apocalypse in terms of Black Death, what the hell do you do? And this spirit that lots of historians would say that the Black Death, hideous pandemic as it was, is part of the story of the rebirth and the kind of the Renaissance of this new spirit of creative endeavor and intention in Europe in the later 14th century into the 15th century. And I want to capture some sense of that. You don't have to sort of project forwards to the 15th century Reformation, but I want to sort of capture the spirit of kind of people gone like half wild because they've survived the end of the world. So there's hellishness because I'm going to have to depict some of the world of the Black Death and the awfulness of that. But I also want to capture some of the kind of levity of medieval life as well, which is the sort of the final part of the portrait of this world I've been trying to build up over 3 books.
I am looking forward to that because it's much like Game of Thrones in some ways, where you get very attached to the characters, but not all the characters make it out alive. You're killing me here.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about Thrones, up until a certain point, was that there was total jeopardy in the storytelling and that anyone could go at any minute. And gone meant gone. It didn't mean that some witch brought you back to life. And so I really admired what George did and then what David Benioff and Dan Weiss did in bringing that to television by really being true, as I say, for the first part of that big story to that ethos. And I think I've tried to keep that in mind in the writing of the books. And, the Essex Dogs in the novel we start with 10 of them. And I don't have 10 of them at the moment. I'm starting book 3, wondering a bit if I've got too few of them, if anything. But that's part of the story. That's part of the, actually getting to those. What I love about, it's a slightly different point, but in non-fiction, I'm sure we've talked about this before over the years, I'm a very, very sort of controlled and architectural and structural writer. Things are built very carefully. I always know exactly what's going to happen at what point in a book. And one of the things I've had to learn and grow into as a writer of fiction is not having that to cling to, is having a sense of not knowing who's going to make it through a story or what somebody's arc is going to be at the beginning. With both Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter, I sort of started planning the book rigorously and then abandoned all those plans as I wrote because the story just and the characters go off in directions you don't expect. And that's one of the fundamental differences between fiction and non-fiction for me as a writer. And they're in the middle of a war and now they're in the middle of the Black Death. So it would be improbable and unlikely for them to survive. And also the more plot armor you give characters because you, the writer, like them or find them useful and want to have them around for lots of books, the less believable your stories become, I think, and the more sort of lightweight and inconsequential, I think, the storytelling. So I've tried not to protect my characters from the world they live in.
I'm thinking about the work that you've done elsewhere and if that has an influence, because I'm thinking about you worked on The World of Flame with Marina Amaral, and I'm wondering if that came into Wolves of Winter, especially as you're telling stories about war, because there's a lot of complexity to each of the characters. They have their own issues that are brought about by childhood or war or all of these things. And I was just wondering, sort of for my own sake, if that came out of some of the work that you did with Marina.
Oh, massively. That work I did with Marina, I owe so much to it. She's so brilliant. And, we had such a great time putting those books together. And it was for me, selfishly, it was a profoundly important period of my development as a writer because I was working on modern history. And out of my kind of, not comfort zone per se, but certainly out of my kind of bracket of knowledge at my fingertips. At the time I started, let's get the chronology right in my head. So Colour of Time must have come out 2018, I think. And then the next two were over the next 2 or 3 years of those books with Marina. And that was all, particularly The World of Flame, which was the second one, which is about the First and Second World Wars. And yeah, I was doing all that as I was conceiving Essex Dogs. And so Essex Dogs, really, certainly the beginning of the book, owed so much to the work I'd done with Marina, because the beginning of Essex Dogs, the novel, is D-Day with a sort of medieval skin applied over the top. And it drew heavily on an article from the Atlantic magazine, I think in the 60s, called First Wave at Omaha Beach, which was a sort of oral testimony of people who'd been there. first wave ashore, those famous photos taken by Bob Capper and so on. So much of that infused Essex Dogs. And in the same way, I didn't go to the same extent with Wolves of Winter and Stalingrad. I thought I would, and I didn't really feel I needed to in the end, because there was lots of stuff about the Siege of Calais itself in 1347 that I felt I could just draw straight on from the actual medieval siege. It didn't need to be analogous. I haven't really decided how much sort of modern naval history I want to kind of smuggle under the radar in book 3. My instinct is probably not that much. But yeah, you're bang on. The work I did with Marina into modern history, like, helped me build, I guess, a vision for what kind of medieval historical fiction I wanted to write, because I didn't want to make it twee, quaint, hey nonny no my liege, I warrant not the French will come, sort of like, I didn't want to go and just do a straight kind of Game of Thrones light where everything is just disgusting and the ultimate vision of the medieval world as hell. I wanted to have some different, so I started drawing on, both in terms of literary genre and in terms of the history that I'd studied working with Marina. I started drawing on a lot of 20th century war to inform the world build of the historical fiction.
Well, I think it's both important and successful, because you and I are all about making sure that people recognize it's not, hey, nani all the time, that there is complexity. Each person is individual in the way that they're coming at things that now are something that we can look back and say, like, this is a moment in history. Maybe the less serious question is, why did you make the Black Prince a sadist? You're killing me, man. I don't think that's a spoiler, because you find that out right away. Why did you make him a sadist?
Well, the Black Prince has benefited from a very romantic historical reputation, which I think is only partially deserved at best.
I know, but I like it.
I'm sure you do. But if you think about, if you were a sort of one of the poor townsfolk of Limoges, I don't think you'd have quite such a romantic idea of the Black Prince as your town was being put to the sword. It struck me that the Black Prince, when he grows up, is not a particularly nice or cuddly person. with a curious set, I suppose, of personal values expressed in many different ways, be it slaughtering the inhabitants of entire towns or having sex with his first cousin. I mean, neither of these things would come naturally to us in the world today. So I felt that this was...
I should hope not, yeah.
maybe the second, depending on what part of the Americas you live in, or indeed the British Isles. The problem I had writing Essex Dogs with the Black Prince was, and this is only a very minor spoiler, is one of the most famous historical vignettes from the Battle of Crécy is at the end, at the battle itself, where the Black Prince, 16 years old, gets into a terrible spot of bother. And word of this is, so it is said, brought to his father, Edward III, commanding the battle from the rear. Sir, your son's in terrible trouble. And he says, oh, let him win his spurs, let him get out of it himself. Now, that had always struck me as an extraordinarily curious thing. It sounds great if you're into like chivalric lore, but it doesn't make any sense. And I remember talking to Mike Livingston about this a lot. Like, it doesn't make sense. That's not a rational thing, even for somebody who's sort of hopped up on chivalry to do when they're talking about their eldest son and heir. Oh, let him work it out for himself. So I was like, how am I going to make sense of this in a book where I definitely don't want to lean into chivalry lore? And it struck me that actually, what would a 16-year-old be like if they were given command of the vanguard of an army? What would a 16-year-old be like if they were going to grow up and become the Black Prince? What could drive a father to say, let him get out of it on his own? And I just thought, well, maybe the Black Prince was just a pain in the ass. And like this guy was just getting on everyone's nerves, and his father had it up to his back teeth with him. I didn't really need to answer that question definitively or prove it with resort to sources, because I was writing fiction. And one of the joys of writing fiction is, so long as you don't, well, one of my rules was, so long as I don't change the kind of the thing, I can play around with the reasoning. And so I thought, yeah, I think the Black Prince is going to be a pain in the ass here. And I let him become a pain in the ass. I sort of took off the limits of pain in the assery with him and let him just run hog wild. And he turned out to be like really not very nice at all. That characterization, there's two characters within the book in terms of the real characters, two characters in the trilogy, I suppose, who've really kind of touched people. One is the Black Prince. Lots of people get annoyed about that characterization of the Black Prince because, like you, they think he's sort of Donny and they don't want him to be a spoiled little shit.
You want him to be nice. You want him to be nice.
Why?
Despite...
What do you want him to be nice for?
I want someone to be nice.
You want like the nice mass murderer. Is that it? Do you write letters to murderers in prison?
Yes, that's what I do.
Are you one of those people?
Yeah, completely. No.
So have you got a savior fantasy about murderers in prison?
It's just, the more you look into any historical figure, the more you realize that a lot of people are just awful. And I would just want some people to be nice. And I know it's a pipe dream, but you're writing fiction. You can let me have this one thing.
Well, maybe I'll add another genre of fiction. Once I'm done with this trilogy, I'll do like kind of cuddly romance medieval fiction. How about that? Where like, on the cover there'll be the Black Prince kind of like slightly stripping off that kind of cool little tabard thing, and maybe he'll have some sort of ripped 6-pack abs, and he'll just be like, he'll be strong but kind. To his first cousin who he marries. Yeah, I'll do incest romance, medieval incest romance. That's the next genre. No one's done that yet.
If anyone could do it, it's you.
Sorry, just to clarify, if anyone can write medieval incest romance, it's me. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah. I mean, you've just accused me of writing letters to mass murderers, so I think
I didn't accuse you. I asked you if that's what you did, and you said no, so I'm going to take you at your word.
I don't. Okay.
You've denied it a lot, though. More than someone who didn't do it would deny it.
You know, you've also described the cover of a medieval incest romance novel very, very well, so I think we're even.
I could if I wanted to. I haven't done it yet.
I haven't written those letters yet, but when I do, I will let you know. Okay. So the other question I wanted to ask you, coming back to Wolves of Winter, especially, but both of the novels so far, one of the interesting characters that is probably the other one that you're talking about right now is an addict. And I think that is an important part of warfare, especially. I think it's fair to say he's an addict. Why did you want to put that in there?
Because it's a war book. You can't have a war book without someone who's a junkie.
Right. So that was my thought, yeah.
Essex Dogs was in some ways conceived as like a Second World War Vietnam novel, like running into the Middle Ages in the 14th century. That's not what it is, but that was sort of part of my thinking. And as I put it together, it just seemed to work really nicely to have that kind of young sort of junkie character in a war novel like this, and also to be surprising in a medieval novel in which that's not a stock character. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I let Romford, who's the 16-year-old in the titular band of Essex Dogs, I just let him go find trouble, and he really did. And I felt like he's a fun character to write, and a sort of street urchin kind of a junkie who gets himself into trouble, but he is quite nice, actually. He's a sort of good boy he's a very odd character. He's one of my favourite characters to write, and I feel a sort of high degree of protectiveness towards him, even as he gets himself into real scrapes. He's a really lovely character to write.
Aww. You're getting sentimental about your characters.
You get very sentimental about characters. I mean, this is one of the differences between fiction and non-fiction. Is I sit in floods of tears when I'm writing these books, and I've come out of the office where I'm sitting right now more than once, sort of tear-streaked face, and my wife in horror has said, "Oh my God, what's happened? Who's died?" And I'll say, well, start to explain, and then she'll just like, "Oh God, no, you're not talking about real people, are you? This is that bloody book." So I get
your
very
imaginary
invested.
Friends.
I get very, very invested, and I take that as a sort of metric for whether the thing is working or not. Because if I don't care about these characters, then it's a little much to expect any readers to care either. But actually, it wasn't Romford who when I said that people react strongly towards characters, it wasn't Romford. It was actually the Earl of Northampton, William de Boon, who's a character in the novels and is a sort of one of my favourites to write, because he's a swaggering loudmouth with an extremely inventive array of curses at his fingertips, but is in many ways also the only one of the nobles, certainly in Essex Dogs, and to an extent in Wolves as well, who actually cares about other human beings. So I like writing him as well.
Yeah, I noticed that the swearing became even more creative in the second book.
Did you think so?
I was like, what's coming up next? It's going to be good.
So the swearing is quite a hard thing to get right or there's no way to get it right in a medieval novel, because our modern swearing of kind of scatology and gynecology doesn't really reflect profanity, literally swearing in the Middle Ages, as you know. It's much more offensive to swear by God's nails or Christ's wounds or some anatomical part of a saint than to just say shit, which is more descriptive a word, literally descriptive word in the times I'm writing about. So I got into a kind of formula where characters would swear these great oaths, where it was like, pick holy person, pick bodily part, and the aim was to try and make it as outlandish as possible without tipping over from funny into stupid. But I do have a copy of the Golden Legend on one of my shelves here that's quite well thumbed now for going through for like obscure saints, finding out like the way of their martyrdom. And the one that stuck in my mind as I really sort of high-fived myself when I'd done it, is Northampton in Wolves of Winter. And I think he swears by the arse of St. Lawrence roasting on the griddle.
Yeah.
Which is a good one. You know, all your listeners will know about St. Lawrence, patron saint of barbecue chefs and comedians, being martyred on the griddle and then asking his tormentors to turn him over because he's done on one side. Like so that was a good. I was happy that day. And sometimes there's a lot of them that didn't make the cut. There's a lot of like stupid profanity lying on the cutting room floor here, but that one I knew was going to make the book in the end.
So you got like a wheel of saints on the wall and a wheel of body parts. You just spin them. See what happens.
You know, sometimes I'll be riding the tube into London or whatever, or walking the dog, or just like having a day, and a curse like this will come into my brain, and I'll write it down on the notes app on my phone. I don't have a file of curses. I don't have that, but I do have like lots of like draft emails to myself with like
just curses.
By the dangling testicles of Saint Anthony, or I don't know what it might be. But it wouldn't be that wouldn't be a good one. That would be a lame one. That would never make the final cut.
Well, isn't he a stalagmite? That might be great. It might be. You should say.
If you think of any, you should email them to me.
I will now.
Any of not any. I don't want everyone doing this, but like. You specifically, Danielle. Okay. Don't everyone listening start emailing me your things. Do it on the internet with a hashtag. Yes. But you, Danielle, can send them to me.
Okay. That's going to be your entire inbox. I'll be like, I'm having a day. That's why I rolled back from, hey, everybody, send me your inventive curse. No, don't. Everybody do not do this. I can't. But that'd be great.
I'll never get any work done.
But it will be fun. It'll be fun as the ship goes down. You know, you'll be just looking at all of these swear words. I mean, then you'll have ones to use when your inbox gets full, right? Yeah,
but then you know what'll happen. Like someone will sue me. That was my swearing. I sent it to you on an email and you used it. Give me all your money and your house.
Oh, okay. Well, now you've given me ammunition. I'll send you something and then I'll sue you. And then... Okay, we're going off the rails.
Surprise.
We tend to do. All right. Since you were last on the podcast, I think it was since you were last on the podcast, you've become a podcaster. You have your own podcast now.
I was the last person who didn't have a podcast, so finally they got me too.
Tell us about your podcast.
My podcast is called This Is History, and it is a podcast I make with Sony Music, and we're through 4 seasons of it now. And it's a scripted, story-based podcast, which is not the usual format for podcasts. I mean, a lot of podcasts are like the one we're doing now, which is 2 people talking to each other. I wanted to do something that had a more structured, story-led element to it, and so that is what I do. And the series that we've done so far, the seasons we've done so far, are subtitled A Dynasty to Die For, and it's the story of the Plantagenets, we started in season 1 with Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. I'm just writing season 5. We're up to Edward II in A Dynasty to Die For. And it's been great fun. And it's been really interesting to go revisit the stories of the Plantagenets, which I think the first time we ever spoke, I just published the Plantagenets probably, which was back in 2012.
Oh, gosh. It was shortly after that, but it was Magna Carta.
Was it?
Magna Carta, yeah. So a really long time now.
Mm.
But, Plantagenets, was probably the first book of yours that I read. Why are you coming back around to Plantagenets? I mean, it's one of my favorites. I think I've read all your books, just about all your books, and it's one of my favorites. Why are you coming back around to Plantagenets for This Is History?
I just really liked those stories, and I knew that other people did as well. And it had been a long time since I'd worked on that. I did. First book I wrote was about the Peasants' Revolt. Then I did Plantagenets. Then I did Wars of the Roses. Then I did Magna Carta. Then I did another one about King George. So I did 5 books, all sort of Plantagenet-ish. And then I went off and started doing Templars, Crusades, Powers and Thrones, stuff with Marina. So I'd been away from England for a while. I was like Richard the Lionheart, had disappeared on Crusade and then not come back for ages. So I figured that now was the time. I just loved those stories. And I had a feeling that they would kind of land in podcast form. I mean, I didn't have a total certainty, but I had a feeling that people would enjoy hearing those stories told for audio in a sort of scripted format. And I think it's proved that way, that the podcast is going from strength to strength, and lots of people seem to be enjoying it. And I'm certainly enjoying it because it's given me a chance to go back to the Plantagenet world and sometimes to pick out different aspects to and elements of the stories than I worked on before. Also, I wrote Plantagenets a long time ago. First published in the UK in 2012, so I was working on it 2009, 2010, 2011. And that's a while ago. And I was really green and at the start of my career. And remember the sense of a writing day then just being hoping I got anything written at all. And the sense of working on a book just being desperation for it to be over, which I mean to have got to the end. And I'm at a different sort of stage of my writing career now where I feel much more in control and know what I'm doing a bit more. And so it's fun to come back to these stories I was working on then with a different sort of sensibility as a writer, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a completely different format. So you're writing small vignettes and then you're explaining them and you're writing small vignettes. What did you find challenging about changing? Because, I mean, your stories tend to be huge sweeping books that have everything in them. And all of a sudden you're writing very short form. What was challenging about that for you?
Not much. I enjoy doing it. It's like, I find it like quite a natural way of writing. I mean, this sort of structure of lots of things that I write is to open with the camera very tight on something and then use that to spin off with a much wider lens to show a bigger story. The structural rhythm of a lot of things I do is tight, wide, tight, wide. And so that's the style that I've carried on in writing This Is History. The challenges of writing for audio are different to the challenges of writing for the page. So when you zero in on a moment, you have to pick something that's going to sound good. And I have to be aware that there's going to be sound design and sound effects and that this has to sort of land through the headphones first and foremost. And so that requires a bit of thought. And I've got to definitely switch into audio mode when I write. But I kind of, I like that. And, I've written for telly as well. And that, again, is different. If you're writing a documentary script, you're aware that the paramount in this is that you're writing to pictures. And it's not the same as writing to audio. You have different economies of writing that you need for writing to pictures than you have for writing for audio. But all these forms have their own sort of rules and things that they demand. And I just like writing. I like doing different things. And I like testing myself and challenging myself. I don't sit still very well and do the same thing over and over very well. Someone said this to me the other night. A very eminent professor who I like very much and know pretty well. And I was saying, I'm going to do this other thing next that's completely different to all the other things. And he said, yeah, that's just what you like. You just like doing different things, right? Yeah, okay, maybe. I felt very seen, as they say.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I'm always jumping from one thing to another, doing something different because it's interesting. It's fun.
It's fun, yeah. And I think that it's important that there's some sort of guiding thread. And yours and mine, I suppose, happen to be that most of the stuff that we do is medieval. But within that's a very broad brief. And I think we're blessed to live in a world today where there are so many different avenues to tell stories and to publish in. I just like making the most of that.
Well, speaking of making the most of that,
go on, tell them what's up.
Yeah, I'm going to tell people what's up. what's up is after like 10 years, we are finally teaming up. We're finally teaming up on This Is History, right? Yes.
Right. Like the Black Prince finally marrying his first cousin. We're actually getting... No, this is very exciting to me. And that's it's...
I don't think it's like that at all. Quick, dig us out of the hole.
No, it's not like that. You're completely right. After a very long time of knowing you and working with you, and recording podcasts and things, I'm very happy to say that we're finally formally doing some podcasting stuff together. So you are going to come in and present a mini season of This Is History. And that is extremely exciting to me for lots of reasons. And top of the list of reasons is because you're such a good storyteller. And I think are the perfect addition to our team. So you can do the explaining of what you're going to be talking about. Go on. What are you going to be talking about on This Is History?
Well, thank you. I'm going to be talking about Philip the Fair, who is Philip IV of France. And he is just a crazy, crazy character. So much happens during his reign and people just kind of gloss over it. They're always like, oh yeah, the Templars were destroyed. Oh, that was Philip the Fair. And they just move on. And there's so much to be said about it. I mean, you and I were talking about collaborating. We were pitching stories or throwing ideas back and forth. And I said, well, you want to stop season 4 with Edward I dying, spoiler alert. That's just how the seasons turn out. And then you wanted to pick it back up with Edward II. So we were thinking about stories that are happening around that time and spitballing. And I mentioned Philip the Fair and you just lit up. Why was it so exciting for you to introduce Philip the Fair to these listeners?
I always light up when you mention a psychopath. I think Philip IV is a totally fascinating character. So within This Is History, as you say, season 4 is Edward I, season 5 is Edward II, and most of what I've done in the seasons of This Is History so far has been very England focused, even when the Plantagenets are essentially a French dynasty. It's so we haven't lived a long time with a king of France, or indeed looked at the world from a purely Capetian perspective. So it's very exciting to do that, number one. Number two is the reign of Philip IV is totally nuts. And at the centre of it, you have such an intriguing king who's very hard to pin down. Very hard even to say what or who he is. But what happens in the course of his reign strikes me as totally extraordinary. His vendetta against Boniface VIII and the Roman Church, his driving out of France of the Jews, his destruction of the Templars, his turning his persecution onto his own family. I mean, this is a wild reign, and it's also personal. And what I think works really well on This Is History is telling stories with that deeply personal approach. And so it's the elision of the narrative and the biographical. And I think Philip's in good hands with you. But I don't know how you found him. I mean, how have you found spending all this time with Philip?
Well, I mean, I love writing letters to mass murderers, right? So he's a psychopath. He's a psychopath. And that is fascinating as a writer, when you're looking at it from such a distant lens, looking at this person and trying to figure out how he works, because he is such a complete grudge holder that he's terrifying. He's terrifying. We were talking about it. I was talking with one of the producers. We were changing one word that was being used in some of the promotion because someone had suggested the word unhinged, and I took it out because I think he is the opposite of unhinged. He's absolutely crazy, but in a way that is so cold-blooded and calculating that it is chilling. It's one of these words that, I don't just throw around words like chilling or psychopath, but this is an unbelievable person who has such control on himself as a person, as a physical being, but he has a whole lot of rage and narcissism and all of these things that make for a really great story.
It's the bearing a grudge that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Nothing goes unremembered with Philip IV. It's a bit like Taylor Swift in that regard.
Yeah.
I was listening to her new album. There's no, every single thing that's ever happened, she's remembered, and now she's having her revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, she's slaying them on record rather than burning them to death in Paris. But I figure you put her in the Middle Ages, she's got a chance of being Philip IV.
Speaking of,
but you're the expert. Tell me what you think.
It's the same type of thing where, yes, absolutely everything is remembered in the smallest slights. He never forgets them. And he's the type of person for whom revenge is best served cold. And so you think about people like King John, who you spent a lot of time with on This Is History. And, someone says something to King John and he will lose it. I think he's the one that people say he throws himself on the floor. He's frothing. He's like biting the mattress. It's either that him or Henry, his dad.
Henry II eats the mattress.
Right.
But John, you mess with John. It's payback is served by first class mail. It comes straight away. It's Richard II who Philip IV is more like in English terms, I think, where Richard II is at the end of the 14th century is kind of slighted in 1386. And he takes his revenge in 1397. Stewed on that for a while.
Yeah, just holds on to it. And you don't know when it's going to come up or how intense it's going to be. And I mean, spoiler alert, it's always going to be intense. So, I was asking you what some of the challenges were for writing for this kind of a podcast. And for me, the challenge has been, so I have 6 episodes and fitting his psychopathy into 6 episodes and the amazing, like, earth-shattering stuff that he does. He just changes the face of Europe and history in a lot of ways. Fitting that into 6 episodes is a bit challenging. And that's for me, like the 5-minute medievalist. I work in short forms, but it has been a challenge to fit that in there because there's so much that happens.
But I think audio is like cinema in that sense, and it's about distilling and about selecting scenes that are representative, right? As historians, we've always liked to sometimes over-season the food. There's too many ingredients. And actually, one of the challenge, I don't know how you found it, but I always like the challenge of tell me this story with as few details as I possibly need, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you've, as you say, 5-minute medievalist, that's what you've kind of specialized in.
Yes. But one thing I actually haven't done since probably high school was narrative writing. So everyone can come and listen and judge, but I haven't done that professionally. So that was a challenge for me, but also really fun. And as you're saying, as a historian, you're so closely connected to the facts. And I've always been doing that nonfiction, sticking really closely to the facts, that I hadn't had the opportunity to do what you're doing in Essex Dogs, where you take what we know and you're being more creative with it. So I had to create a naval battle, which was super fun, but also creating it out of whole cloth in a lot of ways. I think there's like one line in a chronicle, they fought at sea. And then from there, you can just build something that's been really fun and exciting and challenging for me.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. And I think it's, for quite a long time, narrative has made lots of historians suspicious, as though it is pure artifice. And of course, in many ways, it is. Or there's a great deal of artifice that goes into writing detailed narrative in any form, but it's also the thing that people like consuming the most. And so, as a good historian, which you are, I would imagine, or certainly I've always found, that getting such a firm handle on the material that you can start to build a narrative story that you would stand by in terms of its plausibility, authenticity, but would also sort of spark the excitement of somebody who likes watching Netflix dramas or likes watching blockbuster movies. That's a great challenge to have, and one that's really improving and makes you a better writer the more you do it.
Well, I guess people will find out. Now, you've actually read the first couple episodes.
I love them.
How am I doing? Doing all right?
Fantastic. Totally fantastic. And I'm not going to say better than I hope, because that sounds like I had low expectations. But, you hope something is going to work, right? And we've been talking about trying new things and always moving, always trying new things. So you have an idea, you think, I hope this will work. We thought, I hope Danielle will like be a great presenter. And then you just go, well, who knows? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. And so it's always incredibly gratifying when a good idea turns out to be a good idea. And I'm really, really happy that you're enjoying it. I think the episodes you've written and presented of the podcast are superb. I'm having a lot of fun chatting to you in the bonus episodes, which go out to subscribers. Just visit thisishistorypod.com or visit Apple Podcasts, This Is History, and click Try Free at the top of the page to listen to the extra episodes in which you and I dissect the story and go off on, I'd say, fairly similar tangents to the ones we've been off on the last hour, really.
Yes.
Wouldn't you?
Yes.
I don't know if I'd get an incest joke into. I might do. Well, we can try, and record the next one.
Yes, we're recording that soon. Let's see if we can get that in there. I'm
It'll
sure
never
everyone will
pass
be
muster.
so.
There's more layers of like quality control
Wow,
over at
ouch.
Sony Music. No. You know what I mean?
I do. Yes, I do.
Like, and when I say quality, I mean like just decency.
I don't think that's better. I don't think that's
Is it
better.
not? I'm not very good at giving compliments.
Even when I set you right up, you're just like, no.
Hey, listen, everybody, listen to This Is History. I don't know, it doesn't matter whether you listen to my episodes, but listen to Danielle's because they're spectacularly good.
Thank you. And I have a great person to work with, a great person to learn from. Everyone should listen to your episodes. And then
Oh, sorry.
What?
I thought you were talking
It
about
was
someone
you.
else.
See, that's a compliment. That's
Yeah,
how
I'm
you
not
do
good
it.
at I don't like taking them either.
No.
I could live in a world without compliments. I should have been hanging around with Phil at the fair. You'd have got no compliments from him.
It's true. Well, I mean, he's handsome. All right. We should wrap this up. So if people want to hear more about you and me being absolutely ridiculous or completely serious, they can listen to This Is History. My series at Bridges, season 4 and season 5, is called The Iron King, for people who want to learn more about Philip the Fair. And Dan, thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about your work. And I hope that you'll come back on. We didn't get to preview it, but I hope we get you back on in the fall because you're going to be releasing a new book on Henry V, right?
That's right. Henry V, September/October, depending where you are.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You can find Dan's work just about anywhere, but if you'd like to keep up with the latest, visit substack.com/@DanJones. Wolves of Winter is out now and comes out in paperback in the UK May 23rd. You can find This Is History, A Dynasty to Die For, wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, hit subscribe because the trailer episode introducing my new miniseries has just dropped. If you're on the edge of your seat and you just can't wait, well, you're in luck because thanks to Sony Music Entertainment, here's the trailer for The Iron King. It's the late 13th century. A new king is crowned in France. He's only a teenager, but everyone remarks on his calm, stoic nature. And he might just be the most beautiful man in all of Europe. They call him Philip the Bel, the handsome, the fair. But beauty is only skin deep. Behind his angelic features lies a cold, ruthless ambition and a willingness to destroy anyone who stands in his way. No one in France or Europe is ready for what comes next. Philip's unstoppable quest for glory sets him against the Plantagenets, throwing decades of peace out the window. His self-righteousness leads him to take on the Pope himself and destroy one of the world's most famous religious orders for good. His obsession with legacy will threaten to dismantle his entire dynasty and kick off one of the longest wars in all of history. Step inside the brutal reign of one of the Middle Ages' most cold-blooded rulers. This is a story of what happens when a king truly believes he's God's chosen one. Unlike Philip, it ain't pretty. Episode 1 of The Iron King drops straight into the This Is History feed May 21st. Before we go, here's Peter from medievalist.net to tell us what's on the website. What's going on, Peter?
Hey. Well, we have some sad news to kind of start off with. This is the passing of Will Noel. He was only 58 years old. He was a special collections librarian at Princeton. But a lot of medievalists will know him as he was a huge figure in creating open access for medieval manuscripts. He worked with the Walters. He worked at University of Pennsylvania. From even the late 90s and saying, hey, we have to get all these manuscripts digitized, being able to have people access them, creating the infrastructure for that. So he'll be fondly remembered among many medievalists, including myself.
Yes, I never met him, but we all owe him a lot when it comes to being able to access these things from everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can go on YouTube and see quite a lot of talks that he gave just talking about manuscripts, and he really loved his work.
A life well lived, then.
So we have that, plus we have a piece on church building in medieval Western Europe. A team of scholars went in and looked at 1,695 churches over 1,000 communities to see what was being built, when, what was upgraded. And unsurprisingly, they found a church building boom took place across Western Europe, starting in the 11th century, but really kicking off in the 12th century. That's like, if you want churches, that's when they were being built.
That makes sense because things were starting to settle down and arrange themselves, kingdoms starting to arrange themselves in what is more familiar to us today.
Yeah. Like there was a definite building boom in England post-Norman conquest. Then, of course, by the late 13th century and especially the 14th century, that building boom really goes down due to Black Death and things like that. But we see some other kind of really interesting regional stuff. Like there was another building boom in the Low Countries in the 15th century. And while the rest of Europe was kind of stagnating in that area, they were like, let's build more and more churches, more and more cathedrals. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a very fun study. So we have that. Plus, we have much more, including a nice piece by Natalie Malat on the Crusader County of Tripoli.
Nice. That's an important county and something that probably a lot of us don't know enough about. So a great article to check out. And as I mentioned on the last episode, we have exciting stuff happening at medievalist.net, including merch. I'm so excited about this.
Yeah, me too. So like T Public reached out to us and said, hey, you really got to make t-shirts and mugs and, and we'll help you do that. And they were very, very helpful to me. And we've set up a few different products. Basically, you can get any kind of shirt you want with some medieval imagery and, of course, the 5-Minute Medievalist logo.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you and I have both individually and together thought about creating merch because my logo is awesome. And also, there's lots of people who want to wear medieval stuff around or have it on a mug or have it on a tote. And now, not only is it available, but buying this stuff supports medievalist.net, supports me and all the other people who are contributing. So it's awesome. I love it. And I got the sample shirt, put it on Instagram, and it's just awesome. I love it.
It's great. It's great. I've started off with stuff that you'll recognize. Hey, this is a medieval manuscript or a medieval map. And you were going to see, I'm probably going to roll out like 1 or 2 every month, new ones. And I don't know about you, but I'd love to carry a tote with some medieval stuff on it.
I know. I need to get myself a shirt or like a hoodie or something with that manuscript image of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And it's such a weird picture to be wearing on a shirt. And I love it for that reason. It's just so cool.
Yeah, indeed. So basically, we've set up a page. You can find it at TeePublic. That's TEE public.com/stores/medievalistsnet without the dot. So
medievalists.net. So TeePublic.com/stores/medievalistsnet.
That's right. Yeah. So go there, check it out. We get a few bucks with each purchase.
Perfect.
Yay.
Yeah. And I can't wait to see people posting pictures. If you get one of these shirts or mugs or something, take a picture or tag us. I really want to see it. All right.
Indeed.
Thanks, Peter, for stopping by and telling us what's on the website.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone who supports my work and that of other indie historians through medievalist.net's Patreon page. Patrons have access to all sorts of cool stuff like subscriptions to Medieval World magazine, a book club, digital downloads, and ad-free versions of medievalist.net and this podcast. To get in on all the action and support your favorite medievalists, please visit patreon.com/medievalists. For everything from Jones to Bones, follow medievalist.net on Facebook or X at Medievalists. You can find me, Danièle Cybulskie, across social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5-Minute Medievalist. And you can find my books at all your favorite bookstores, where you can get hold of Chivalry and Courtesy, Medieval Manners for a Modern World, now out in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Our music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Thanks for listening, and have yourself an amazing day.